July 20, 1969. The world holds its breath, millions of eyes glued to televisions. The moment humanity will remember forever. But imagine the camera fades in, not on Neil Armstrong's voice, not on an American flag, but on the hammer and sickle, planted firmly into the dust of the moon. What if the Soviets had landed on the moon before the United States? The moon landing was not just about exploration. It was a battle for global supremacy. A symbol of technological might. A declaration of power. In our timeline, the United States won. But history could have turned differently. The Soviet Union was first in almost every milestone of the space race. First satellite with Sputnik. First human in orbit with Yuri Gagarin. First woman in space with Valentina Tereshkova. By the early 1960s, it seemed inevitable that Moscow, not Washington, would be first on the moon. So, what if they had been? To understand this, we must first grasp what the Soviets were building. The N-1 rocket. Their answer to America's mighty Saturn V. The N-1 was designed to be a super-heavy launch vehicle. 30 engines clustered together, towering almost as high as the Saturn V, but more powerful on paper. It was meant to carry the L-3 lunar complex, a lander, a crew capsule, and the dreams of a nation determined to prove socialism's superiority. Had it succeeded, history would have bent in their favor. Imagine the year, 1968. The N-1 works. The Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov, already famous for the first spacewalk, steps down a ladder. The world watches as his boot prints press into the lunar regolith. And instead of Armstrong's words, the world hears, "For the motherland. For humanity." In reality, the Soviet dream failed. 4 test launches of the N-1 ended in catastrophe. Engines failed. Explosions shook the steppes of Kazakhstan. Entire launch pads destroyed. The US Saturn V, by contrast, succeeded flawlessly in every manned mission. Its engineering was reliable, its budget astronomical. And in 1969, it carried Armstrong and Aldrin to victory. But in our alternate history, let us erase those failures. Let us assume that Soviet engineers solved the N-1's flaws. That resources were funneled, political will unwavering. Then, the Soviet Union takes the moon. Picture the reaction in Washington. The US watches helplessly as the USSR claims the moon. The carefully crafted image of American technological dominance collapses overnight. The Soviets are not only first in orbit, but now first on another world. In the Cold War, perception was everything. The world's neutral nations, the emerging nations of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, would see socialism not as a crumbling experiment, but as the future of humanity. The balance of ideological influence shifts. With the Soviet flag on the moon, the US response would be fierce. Budgets already swollen for Apollo would double, perhaps triple. Washington would not accept second place. Programs cancelled in our timeline, like the nuclear-powered Nerva rocket, or plans for permanent lunar bases, might have been resurrected. The Soviets, emboldened, would pour resources into holding their lead. A military race for dominance beyond Earth begins. Space becomes the new battlefield. With Soviet prestige at its height, international science bends toward Moscow. Soviet rockets attract partnerships. European scientists, perhaps even Japan or India, align with the Soviet bloc for access to lunar technology. The US might still land men on the moon, but not as pioneers, as followers. And in a war of ideas, the second to arrive is forgotten. This reshapes the computer revolution, satellite industries, even global communications. The Soviet system, not the American, becomes the model many nations aspire to copy. Never underestimate symbolism. For ordinary people in 1969, the moon landing was proof that America could achieve the impossible. It fueled a generation of scientists, dreamers, and innovators. But what if that inspiration had come with a red flag? In schools across the globe, children might grow up believing the Soviet Union represented the future. The Iron Curtain, no longer just a barrier, but a beacon. Would Berlin have fallen? Would the Soviet Empire have endured longer, carried on the wings of lunar glory? History tells us the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, bankrupt, exhausted. But in this alternate path, prestige buys time. Economic struggles still exist, but propaganda victories strengthen loyalty at home and admiration abroad. Perhaps the USSR lasts a decade longer, perhaps longer still. And if the US races harder, the competition might push humanity further, faster. A Mars mission in the 1980s, permanent lunar colonies by the 1990s, a future rewritten by rivalry among the stars. Of course, it never happened. The Soviet dream fell in clouds of fire at Baikonur. The United States triumphed. Armstrong's words, not Leonov's, echo through history. But the question lingers, how fragile was destiny? A few failures turned victory into defeat. A few successes could have reshaped the world. The moon was more than dust and craters. It was a mirror, reflecting the power of nations back upon themselves. So we ask, if the Soviets had planted their flag first, would the 20th century belong not to America, but to them? And more importantly, if they had, would humanity be living on the moon today? And if the race had not ended with the moon, what if the next frontier had been Mars?